is Voices from the Regions. And I welcome everybody back. This session obviously has to do with the regional forums that have been having discussions over the past few days, all related to this conference and the issues that we are dealing with. But before we get to that point, we're going to have two special guests. And I'm going to start with the first, and I'm going to hope that there are no technical glitches, but let's hope for the best. It's really an honor to have back at the World Press Freedom Conference a person who has participated in many of its past editions. Before as an NGO representative, then as UN Special Rapporteur, but this time she is joining as the recently appointed Secretary General of Amnesty International, and that is Agnès Callamard. She will be interviewed by Geneva-based Brazilian journalist who is specializing in human rights, Mr. Jamil Chade. So I'm hoping we have them on the line, and any luck? Because thanks for the insert. Let us see if we have Agnès and Jamil. If we can get an indication from the technical team. If not, we can move on to Alain Modou. No? Okay. Apparently they just need a few seconds just to get that up and going. So, Toivo, one of the critical things about this conference is obviously regional voices. You know, they've been meeting, as you saw on the screen now, the offshoots of the Windhoek Declaration, if you like, were declarations in other parts of the world, as we've both spoken about in recent weeks. And obviously, those groups have got together again and put their input into this conference. What are you expecting to hear from the regions when they report back shortly?
Yeah, no, thank you, Gwen. I think what is critical is that there is variety in you know, the demographics of events as they relate to media differ in different regions also.
Absolutely.
So when people share experiences from their respective regions, and then we try to find to harmonize these views into one, I think it's a beautiful thing, because what you want at the end of the day is to have some sort of global consensus on these issues. Absolutely,
and as I say, the more people who are involved in crafting, for example, the Windhoek Plus 30 Declaration, which is going to emanate from this conference, the better. It wouldn't be very nice if it was just the conference participants here present, but in fact there's been a consultative process going on around the globe, so we look forward to seeing the outcome of that, put it that way.
Thank you, Gwen. I'm told we can proceed now.
Thank you very much, Toivo. And hopefully now we can get Agnès and we can get Jamil online. There we go. We have greetings, Agnès, greetings, Jamil. I have just introduced you, Agnès, and also Jamil, who's going to interview you, and we look forward to that. Jamil, you have 15 minutes, please, for this. Thank you so much. Take it away.
Thank you all. Cheers from Geneva, from the Human Rights Council. Ms. Callamard, thank you for being with us. We are 9 years from 2030. Social realities suffered an important blow with the impact of the pandemic. And we found out the fragility of access to information. How do institutions such as Amnesty look to the future in terms of challenges, and how would they use mechanisms already established, such as the SDGs and the UPR, to promote and achieve concrete results on issues such as press freedom, freedom of expression, and access to information. Over to you, Ms. Callamard.
Thank you very much, Jamil. And hello, everybody from London. It's a pleasure to be joining you. As many of you know, I've been an avid participant to World Press Freedom Day, organized by UNESCO. So it's a real pleasure to be digitally present in Namibia. Thank you very much, Jamil, for your question. The pandemic has highlighted and exacerbated inequality, and it demonstrated that many violations are actually hardwired into the governance system of the planet and into the governance system of many countries. Years of lack of investment, of neglect, of disregard for fundamental freedom, of neglect into fundamental issues such as health, have led us, frankly, to our knees in 2020, led the world to 3 million dead and rising, as both your country, Brazil, and India in particular, but not only, have shown. The pandemic has taken place in a context that was already very complex. We know that we are confronting climate change, which has an existentialist impact on many people around the world. We are also in the context of reshaping of the international system, with global powers vying for supremacy, in particular the United States, China, but also Russia. And in that context, freedom of expression, freedom of information has become an important tool for any of those fights and any of those challenges, but particularly in the way countries are trying to position themselves vis-à-vis those key challenges. During the pandemic, Amnesty International and others have demonstrated that governments around the world have violated freedom of expression, have prevented crucial information from reaching us, including on the origin at the beginning of the crisis in China. Media workers, but also health workers, have been targeted for spreading the news about the pandemic. I'm saying all of that because I think we need to be acutely aware that this is not business as usual. We are not in a context of 10 years ago. We are confronting a range of challenges which on their own, just one on their own, will be incredibly tough for civil society and for press freedom activists. But imagine that we have 10 long-term or medium-term, such as climate change, the reshaping of the international system, inequality that is, hardwired into everything, economic dogma that has largely precipitated some of the worst impact of the pandemic. So how do we fight back? Of course, we need to rely on the existing instrument, the SDGs, the UPR, Goal 16, Target 10, and we will be there, Amnesty International, and I know many of you, on the front line to ensure that people understand that press freedom, freedom of expression is essential to the realization of all the SDGs, because without information, you don't have health. Without information, you don't have women's education. Without expression, you don't have development. We will be there to fight for Target 10 with investigation, with data collection, with benchmarking. But I think we need to be very aware of the fact that this will not be sufficient. And the challenge to us as an international community of people committed to press freedom is that we'll have to create new instruments and new tools. We can't rely on SDG, UPR, and others to protect press freedom, because the challenges are far too multiple and far too deep to be solely, attacked by our SDG and UPR tools. So I think the challenge is on us to go beyond these ones. The challenge is on us, and maybe this is something that is coming out of that conference. We need to think beyond that. We need to be aware, in my view, that at many levels, the system needs to be reset. The system needs to be rebooted. We are beyond repairs, because if we stick to a repair model, we won't be able to tackle the challenges, the current one, but the bigger one that are coming up.
Yes, indeed, Ms. Callamard, the challenges are absolutely enormous. Now, COVID-19 was a cautionary tale on the dangers a society may face when information is denied, manipulated, or censored. Since our theme this year is information as public good, how do you see the concrete links between press freedom and those rights that you just mentioned, right to health, right to life, right to development? How do you see these links happening?
Your question reminds me of, my colleagues at UNESCO will tell me. We met in Mozambique, several years back to discuss exactly that issue, the relationship between development and access to information. There were really great panels and discussion. And I'm making that reference because it means that the issue is not new. We all remember the work by Amartya Sen on famine and press freedom. And in fact, he probably is absolutely gutted by what's happening right now in India. We remember Chernobyl and how access to information, the violation of it had, incredible repercussions on people and continue to this day. In fact, any environmental crisis that resulted into some legal development at international level around environment and access to information. I know that for many women around the world, information is key for the realization of their sexual and reproductive health. In fact, for many men as well around the world, access to information on when and how to have abortion, access to information on ways to limit reproduction. All of those things are about women taking charge of their sexuality, and information is key. So again, I'm going to go back to what I've said earlier. There are new dimensions to that problem, so to these links. It's not a problem, it's a clear links. What are the new dimensions? The first one is that throughout the pandemic and a little bit earlier than that, government chose to reject medical science. Some head of state chose to reject the information that was publicly available around how to fight back the pandemic. And by so doing, they killed their citizen. Government chose to refuse to disclose the number of deaths. Yes, it is not new, but it's happening right in front of our eyes. Suppression of key information that would allow the world to fight back the pandemic. And here I'm choosing to name China, but the refusal to disclose the number of deaths is a global problem. So we have, in fact, a coalition of governments that are prepared to withdraw crucial information in the name of their reputation, frankly, or elections, crucial information that will save us, particularly people in the most disadvantaged communities, that could save us, save them from death. To me, that is a new dimension that we are confronting at the moment. It is the global nature of the attempt by government to control information, even when they know that this information could save thousands and millions. Information such as that is embedded in the vaccination. And here I want to refer to intellectual property right, which I know is a controversial issue. But imagine that right now, the richest government of the world, United States, Canada, European Union, UK, are refusing to lift the intellectual property right attached to the vaccination, are refusing to release the information attached to the production of the vaccines. In the name of what? In the name of profit. They are prepared to let millions die, frankly, so that profit can be made, so that the pharmaceutical company can continue to raise and make billions on the back of people's lives. It won't be me who will be hurt by that. Let me be very clear. It will be the people from the most disadvantaged communities. It will be the people in global south countries, in countries of lowest income, and of the most vulnerable communities in middle income countries. So in the name of profit, our government, Western governments, are holding on to information, are holding on to knowledge, and are prepared to stop that knowledge from being shared so that vaccine could be multiplied, so that vaccine could be reproduced. That to me is the reality of the challenges we are confronting right now. And I know I'm not coming up with answers, although in my view, there is a very clear answer about the last challenge I've given you. We need to lift the intellectual property rights attached to that, to the vaccine. We need to let the knowledge, we need to share the knowledge so that South Africa, India can produce and produce and produce the dose of vaccine that the world needs. That's what we need.
On that very passionate note, Agnès, as usual, always wonderful to hear your voice. We're going to have to bring that segment to an end. Sorry about that, but we're really constrained by time. We're going to move on now to our second special guest, and he's also joining us virtually. You will have seen his testimony at the opening ceremony, telling the story of how the landmark 1991 seminar came about and came to be held in Windhoek. And I'm pleased to introduce, and I hope we have him online, Alain Moudou, who was the UNESCO Assistant Director General in 1991. Do we have Alain here?
Yes.
Alain,
I'm with you.
Greetings from Windhoek once again.
Oh, hello, Gwen.
It's me.
First of all, I would like to thank UNESCO, in particular the Director General, Madame Audrey Azoulay, for associating me with this great event, this global conference. And I wish also to greet all the participants. I'm very pleased, Gwen, to be reunited with you after so many years. I can't imagine that already 30 years have passed since we had this conference. I would like also to emphasize that I'm really pleased that this 30th anniversary takes place in Namibia. Not only because, of course, it was the place of the first seminar in 91, but also because Namibia is really an example for press freedom in Africa, even in the world. It's number one on the list of the Reporters Without Borders, on the, let's say, not only the number one as African country, but even ahead of European countries like France, Spain, or even United Kingdom.
Right.
Finally, I would like to evoke two persons who are not with us today for obvious reasons. First, Pius Njahwe, the Camerooni journalist who was with you when the co-chairman of the seminar. And also Ambassador Lambert Messon, who was at that time president of the Africa Group at UNESCO in Paris, who really supported us and made possible all the results which followed the seminar.
Exactly. Alain, it's been so wonderful to hear your voice and have you with us today, just for that brief message. And again, what Alain said is so true, to recognize also many of the others who were here in Windhoek in 1991. And there were people like Mox Shivute from Namibia, Makani Kabweza from Zimbabwe, Fred Membe from Zambia, Stanley Mulenga also from Zambia, Vincent Chikwari from Zimbabwe, and so many names. I believe we ran them last night. Again, we're very short on time, but we have a critical session coming up, which is to hear from our moderators from the different regional fora. I'm going to start with the rapporteur from the African Forum, who is Nkaba Mashazi, from the Regional Campaigns and Fundraising Coordinator at MISA. If we have Nkaba on the line, is there any luck with that? In the meantime, I will just introduce the other rapporteur. Oh, you here in person. Wonderful. Please go ahead and take a seat. And 4 minutes, please, Nkaba, your report back. Where is it? No. Please go ahead. A mic is on its way, I believe. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Nkaba.
All right, I'm just going to go briefly because I don't have much time. But the delegates from the Africa Forum were engaged in discussions, and there were notable speakers who spoke about the subject of the threat of internet regulation, increasing attacks on journalists, the threat posed by COVID-19 pandemic. Okay. Good morning once again. All right, delegates from the Africa Forum spoke about the threat of internet regulation, increasing attacks on journalists, the threat posed by the COVID-19 pandemic, disinformation to democratic, and the threat of disinformation to democratic institutions, and the threat and the importance of a free press to fair electoral processes. In the work of the COVID-19 and the growth of online platforms and social media, there's a discernible effort by African governments to undermine freedom of expression and of the media through the promulgation of COVID-19 regulations that seek to regulate free speech at a time when Africans need accurate information to make informed decisions about their right to life and their right to health. The need for access to information makes the media an ally of the people and an important cog in the fighting of the pandemic. On the other hand, there are also efforts to spread disinformation and endanger journalists, inhibit the free flow of information and images, and infringe upon the public's right to know the truth about their communities and their world. In light of the growing threat of mis- and disinformation, there's a need to scale up media literacy campaigns and ensure media literacy is included in school and university curricula. Also, this comes when there is a diminishing trust in the media and failure by the media to include women and other minority groups, and a lack of diversity, which all serve to undermine the importance of the media. Speakers also reiterated that there is a need for governments, the United Nations and its agencies and IGOs to support public interest media through a global fund for public interest media. In addition, there is a need to develop the strength and the role of media and journalism in controlling corruption and fostering transparency. And also there's a need to invest in information environments that promote accountability. Speakers say there is need to support effective regulation of social media platforms, in particular with regard to algorithmic transparency and fight against dis- and misinformation. There was a proposal to come up with an international human rights framework that governs digital platforms. This framework should also include standards to safeguard women's rights online. To counter dis- and misinformation, the speaker said there was need to develop the provision of high-quality journalistic coverage, and in particular in rural areas, by promoting community media and media reporting in minority languages. African governments were urged to take all measures necessary to guarantee the safety and security of journalists. African governments were urged to ensure the cybersecurity regulation is informed by the revised principles of the ACHPR, Declaration on Freedom of Expression and Access to Information, which recognizes the internet as a right. African governments were encouraged to ensure that the media is free and secure, to ensure that the media can play a role in promoting sustainable growth and regional integration. And finally, speakers demanded for a roadmap upon which countries that enacted repressive legislation during the outbreak of the pandemic will review and repeal these laws. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. And Kaba, some very important points indeed coming from the Africa Forum, and I'm sure a lot of that will be incorporated in our Windhoek Plus 30 declaration. Next up is the rapporteur from the Arab Forum. Obviously, this from the Sana declaration was there, and that is Ruba El Helou, who is a lecturer at Notre Dame University. Do we have her with us? Is she here?
Yes, hello. Can you hear me?
Thank you so much. Please go ahead. You have 4 minutes. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you. I'll start immediately. So the Arab Regional Forum consisted of 2 panels with distinguished speakers from who provided us with this discussion. The following is a 4-minute condensed briefing of the recommendations. The opening speech was given by Mrs. Constanza Farina, Director and Representative of UNESCO Office in Beirut. She stressed on the concept of information as a public good in a holistic, communicative, and sustainable process. The discussion started with a panel titled Viability of Media in the Arab Countries, moderated by Nizar Habash from Al Watan TV in Palestine. Then we moved to the second panel titled Disinformation and the Infodemic and Hate Speech in the Arab region, moderated by George Awad, Communication and Information Officer, Program Officer at UNESCO Beirut. The first panel pointed out the importance of sustaining independent media platforms, especially in areas impacted by protracted conflicts or in countries in transition towards democracy. We also saw how important it is to build the capacity of journalists and academicians through training and well-designed, updated curriculum covering the latest innovative approaches and learning objectives. A culture of lawfulness through education, awareness raising, and investigative journalism piloting projects are essential elements to promote rule of law, accountability, and citizenship. However, there are numerous lessons to be learned in areas witnessing war, economic deficits, or pandemics. Journalists there are in need of protection economically, socially, health-wise, and with respect to their security, in addition to the need of a regulatory body to ensure quality reporting. The second panel placed the digital sphere at the core of its discussion, in particular on how to create an environment for improved access to information and for media literacy initiatives and projects to debunk disinformation and hate speech. Several initiatives were launched online at the start of the COVID-19 pandemic through digital forums and online training. Success stories were shared, in particular reaching and promoting media information literacy to females, focusing on the role of housewife, as well as creating media labs to empower journalists and the use of innovative technologies and applications. The role of sarcasm in media in the region is still a very sensitive topic. It can be a tool to combat information disorder and hate speech if the institution is able to build trust with the audience. Many recommendations were suggested. Because of time constraint, I will highlight a few. Focusing on the role of media information literacy to train journalists, educators, students, or citizens in general. Media information literacy should be a learning tool available to equip citizens with critical thinking, providing protective institutions to ensure journalist safety and face the challenges that hinder access to information and prevent justice in a wide variety of areas. Creating funds and donation mechanism for under-resourced media institutions to promote independent and free journalism, in particular for investigative journalists to cover corruption. Combating lack of awareness and understanding of online platforms and the use of application, in addition to revisiting the code of conduct, should be tackled to debunk disinformation and spread truth. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ruba, for that very brief intervention and very important issues coming from the Arab region. Next up is our rapporteur from the Asia and Pacific Forum. That is Therese San Diego Torres, Director of Research, Policy and Advocacy at in Manila in the Philippines. Is she on the line?
Hi.
Great stuff. Please go ahead. Thank you so much, Therese. You have 4 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. It is my honor to share highlights from the Asia-Pacific Regional Forum, which covered experiences from New Zealand, Myanmar, India, South Korea, Indonesia, and Thailand. In the session on media viability, moderator Ms. Amalia Cabusao from the Philippines noted that journalists are working under precarious conditions, with media facing the risk of being captured by political, economic, and ideological powers. And even in seemingly optimal conditions for journalism, such as in New Zealand, Zealand, some threats remain. Dr. Peter Thompson identified 3 spheres where problems have emerged: state, market, and civil society. The number of journalists decreased over the past decade, and the newspaper sector's advertising share has dropped. Consumers are embracing entertainment over public service media content. It also appears consumers have not been critical of misinformation, and they have not been careful about sharing their data. Dr. Thompson encourages asking more critical questions about how online platforms use our data and identifying opportunities to push for public interest journalism. On the other hand, all eyes are now on Myanmar, and Mr. Sue Win shared that apart from the shutdown of independent news and the arrest of journalists amid military rule, another concern in Myanmar is the rising racism and racial and religious narrow-mindedness. He noted the need to approach the news from the broader perspectives of humanity and the truth by following the fundamental principles of journalism, and at the same time, reporting issues in the proper context and perspective. In the session on transparency of digital platforms, moderator Ms. Vicheka Khan from Cambodia underlined how many people remain in the dark about the inner workings of online platforms and the flow of problematic content, such as disinformation and hate speech. Ms. Seema Mustafa from India proposes worldwide, regional, and nationwide policies which all ensure accountability and bring in a system of ethics that no platform can violate. She said these policies should be created by citizens involving multiple stakeholders from different sectors. Dr. Min Jung Kim from South Korea emphasized the need for ethical guidelines in machine learning and AI technology amid emerging issues surrounding apps where hate speech and abuse have been detected. She emphasized the need to demand transparency from online platforms, increase public awareness about bias in algorithms, and increase the public's consciousness about diversifying media consumption, breaking out of filter bubbles. And lastly, in the session on media and information literacy, or MIL, moderator Ms. Joanne Ding from Malaysia noted that empowering citizens with MIL provides a long-term response to disinformation and hate speech. Ms. Ika Ningtyas described the problems in Indonesia amid the pandemic, such as the collapse of media businesses. Journalists have lost their jobs, and journalists face challenges related to the spread of misinformation, even from public figures. This is why organizations are empowering journalists by providing media literacy and fact-checking training. Dr. Ray Wang from Thailand raised thought-provoking questions, one of which was, how can we educate and nudge people to be more reflective and less reactionary? He pointed out the importance of not only fact-checking, but also listening to different viewpoints, which means there should be more conversations on subjects people do not agree on. Dr. Ray Wang also emphasized the importance of going beyond formal education and ensuring that MIL programs and campaigns are inclusive and positive, stimulating dialogue and discussion among the public. Those were the key insights from the Asia-Pacific Regional Forum.
Thank you so much, Therese, for those very important perspectives from your region. And I do notice that coming from the reports already in, is there are a lot of commonalities, and media information literacy certainly seems to be one of them. We now have the rapporteur from the Central Asia Forum, 29 years after the Alma-Ata Declaration, and that is Erila Turdubayeva, President of the Association of Communicators of the Kyrgyz Republic. Can we have them online? Are we there?
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. At our Central Asian Forum, we had 3 panels. We discussed strengthening the viability of the media, internet transparency, and capacity of media and information literacy. So the issues we discussed were the issues of media in Central Asia and Eastern Europe, and the participants of the forum flagged the following areas. Freedom of expression. Diversity and pluralism of the media are threatened in the region. Safety of journalists is a challenge. Journalists are being attacked. Tracking and detainment of journalists are widespread. no mechanisms of the monitoring of threats on journalists in governmental bodies, and no policies to protect journalists, no national body to support and protect journalists, and national laws restricting the freedom of journalists. Local journalists in the region, in Central Asia, they need education and training to strengthen their capacities, material to support and consulting for local journalists, and they also need skills to use new technology skills, data journalism, and also analytical journalism and investigative journalism skills. So also the low protection of privacy and personal data. So people's personal data and privacy is not being protected, and low level of media literacy and critical thinking and fact checking and media literacy skills in population, and capacity building of media literacy educators who are journalism teachers and trainers on media literacy is needed a lot. And we had recommendations of the forum Almata in Eastern Europe and Central Asia. First of all, media viability, support pluralism, the media, return to the root of journalism.
I think, have we lost Erila? Okay, well, she gave a good summary, I think.
The quality of sustainable.
Okay. Thank you very much, Erila, for those perspectives from Central Asia. Now it's time to hear the Europe Forum. The rapporteur from there is Professor Elda Broghi, Scientific Coordinator of the Center for Media Freedom at the European University, based in Italy.
Good morning, everyone, and happy World Press Freedom Day from Europe, from Florence, from Italy. So, in 1997, the Sofia Declaration acknowledged that the advent of new information and communication technologies representing new channels for the free flow of information could and should contribute to pluralism, economic and social development, democracy, and peace. 24 years later, today, we still think that the internet is a terrific tool that allows the diffusion of information and contributes to democracy, but press freedom needs to be asserted again against not only the control by the states, but also against the control of online platforms, the giants of the web. Information as a public good must be safeguarded in the online environment. The European Forum discussed some of the risks for pluralism and democracy in the new media and information ecosystem. And it did it having regard to the European way of doing it, to how European countries, the European Union, the Council of Europe, and the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe are trying to tackle such risks. One of the main issues at stake in the online environment is the spread of disinformation, particularly when it has an impact on the integrity of the democratic debate and on elections. Public, truly independent oversight and co-regulation has become the preferred type of governance when it comes to rules for content curation online in Europe. In that respect, the EU, the European Union, is slowly moving away from the idea of leaving to the platforms the task to merely self-regulate, and it's preparing a set of policy and stricter rules to enforce increased transparency and accountability for platforms. This includes a Digital Service Act and a regulation of online political advertising. Restoring trust in media is another cornerstone, a policy that needs to be addressed. And it can be done with media and information literacy, giving individuals the necessary tools to critically navigate and select the huge amount of information and disinformation they are exposed to. At the same time, support to independent media and an increased protection of journalists must be ensured. Distrust in media has a terrible impact on the safety of journalists online and offline, and on downgrading of the profession. The European Union is, in this respect, working on a Media Freedom Act. Another takeout is that being information a public good, it must be supported and funded as such. The news media sector faces market failure and urgently needs new funding models, a mix of private and public, as well as increased direct and indirect public support, fully taking into account the respect for editorial independence. It's also important to sustain funding to independent public service media, as well as journalists' author rights, fair remuneration, and copyrights. All in all, we need a sort of Marshall Plan for the information news sector. This echoes the Sofia Declaration. We recommended an independent media loan fund for media in Central and Eastern Europe in particular. And Central and Eastern Europe, last but not least. The emphasis on the online environment should not prevent from stressing that, in particular in some national contexts, some illiberal democracies, disinformation is not only shared through social media platforms, but through state-sponsored and government-controlled media networks and outlets. It is particularly important to support independent media there. In conclusion, there is no one-size-fits-all solution when addressing the complexity and challenges for freedom of the press in the online environment. But it's not wise to pretend that the wisdom of the crowd will prevail in a marketplace of ideas. A very basic takeout comes from the European Forum. Compliance of online platforms with human rights standards cannot be left to companies alone. The European way to deal with this new information ecosystem is a holistic approach that is betting on new governance tools and on stronger economic support to journalism, on a vision of a democracy that should not be disrupted but enhanced by the new information ecosystem. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Broggi, for those very astute observations, your region, and to see also the commonalities again between other regions of the world. Our final rapporteur from the Latin American and Caribbean Forum, 27 years after the Santiago Declaration, is Carolina Botiero from the Fundación Charisma in Colombia. Have we got her online? Thank you. Please go ahead, Carolina.
Very good early morning. Hello, very good early morning here in Colombia. So in the regional forum, opening remarks by the director at UNESCO's Regional Office for Science outlined Unesco's call to reflect on information as a common good, as we call it in Latin America, followed by Deputy Regional Director for UNDP, who called for public and private governance to be used as an important tool. The first panel addressed a very real concern, the media's long-term viability, which has been put in jeopardy even more since COVID-19, to the point that speakers agree with the UN Secretary General warnings about its possible disappearance. The complexity of the situation is complicated by the fact that there are many different realities that need to be dealt by. State advertisement and control, and even climate change were mentioned. The experts mentioned also how the transition from physical to digital media had a significant effect in the region, presenting platforms as protagonists that could no longer be ignored. The traditional division of journalism on the one side and funding on the other was mentioned as a model that isn't working anymore. Journalists need to address both as critical components of their work. On the subject of state incentives, there was a call for incentives to be designed from a state perspective, avoiding the government capture and without jeopardizing media freedom. Incentives should be linked to media companies' commitments to keep journalists at work. It must include independent media using the state's experience with local content subsidies. In the second panel, about strengthening the transparency of online platforms as essential pillars for information to remain a common good, the experts agreed that self-regulation, non-regulation dichotomy must be resolved, and they believe that the complexity of the actors involved, as well as the variety of contexts, require different approach and multi-stakeholder consent of building mechanisms that seek alternative solutions to that dichotomy. The transition from self-regulation to regulation is underway. and it must include discussions about more and better accountability to include human rights standards in content moderation at all levels. Economic algorithms, infrastructure, and uses were also later identified by the experts as targets for transparency development. A call for regulation to address the complexity of this ecosystem, including assessments of its multidimensional, multi-stakeholder, and a general approach that can avoid regulation of singular products that may not exist even in a few years, was also raised. In the third panel on the challenge of disinformation and hate speech, a call to identify them as two distinct phenomena that are related but should be treated and analyzed separately was made. For the expert, formal media plays a critical role in addressing this situation, delivering quality of content. Experts also in the region agreed that media literacy is an important tool for viewers to build and improve their capacity to transition to the digital world and understand and deal with disinformation, preventing the rise in hate speech and its implications. The role of young people, formal and non-formal education system was also part of the debate, with important mentions to libraries. Speakers mentioned the digital divide in the region that means problem with access to connectivity and devices, and they call for access to the internet as a human role. Freedom of expression as a key component in this process also requires the understanding that it is not only just a right for all, but also an obligation, and that there is a distinction between ordinary citizens and public or political leaders. The latter must take responsibility for what they say, because in some instances, they are the ones who spread misinformation and hate speech. I cannot close without asking you all to keep an eye on my home, Colombia, where freedom of expression is in danger as social discomfort has people in the streets, disregarding the pandemic and facing repression. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Carolina, from the report from the Latin American and Caribbean Forum. Also very important observations. We have 10 minutes left for this panel, and I believe we will be bringing back Alain Moudou to ask for his... Alain, do we have you here?
Yes, I hear you.
Alain. I wanted to ask your impression. I wasn't sure if you were privy to those report backs from the different regions of the world, from, Sana in Yemen, Alma-Ata in Kazakhstan, and Sofia in Bulgaria, all those countries that and regions that followed suit on the Windhoek Declaration. What do you see the difference as between then and now?
Well, first of all, I must say that it demonstrates that the Windhoek Seminar was the beginning of a process which extended to all parts of the world. And it acted really as a catalyst.
Right.
And I'm very glad to see that not only the Windhoek Declaration, but the Sana Declaration, as well as the Santiago, the Almaty, and the Sofia Declaration are also fundamental texts which are used in all these regions to support efforts to promote press freedom. This being said, I confess that I'm a little bit sad to see that the problems which we had 30 years ago still exist in most parts of the world.
Yes, indeed.
Even worsen, and new problems now have developed, in particular because of the new technologies, in particular the advent of the social media. We live in a world today where there are millions of sources, information sources, and it's very difficult to find what is accurate or not, what is right, what is wrong. And of course, the fake news is a terrible phenomenon. I have considered the fake news as maybe the most perverse form of censorship, because the people don't know what is true and what is not true. That's why what I call quality journalism is very important. Journalism, the professional standards of the journalists are, let's say, the key for to make information as a real public good. Information should be accurate, verified, and this is the ABC of the information today, the information we need to reinforce our democratic systems, to reinforce the confidence among the public.
Thank you for that, Alain. I think it's true to say also that what started as a small seminar for Africans by Africans has become a global movement. So the struggle for press freedom is never fully won. We simply have to continue and add as many voices as possible to that struggle to be free. Thank you all for this panel. Thank you to all our panelists, our participants from all corners of the globe. And I will hereby hand over to Toivo. I think the next session is about to get underway.
Yeah, thank you very much, Gwen, for that able coordination of those very important messages from the regions. I believe we are taking a small break, isn't it? Yeah, and then we continue. But that is my reading of the situation. But yeah, let's take a small break.